My friend's mom said, "You've grown too much to be his friend." I never expected her to remember my name, let alone everything else. The laundromat on Maple still smells like warm soap and coins, the kind of place that hums even when no one's talking. I go there on Tuesdays because it's cheaper before noon and because the woman who owns it never asks questions. I fold my clothes the same way every time. Shirts first, socks tucked into themselves. I take my phone out, unlock it, lock it again. There's a message thread with my name on top, and no messages inside. I leave it that way. That's where I saw her again, standing by the change machine, squinting like it had personally offended her. "Does this thing ever work?" she said. Not really to me, just to the room. I fed the machine a quarter from my pocket. It accepted it, obedient as anything. She laughed once, surprised, then looked at me properly. Not the polite glance people give when they're done speaking, but the kind that lingers half a beat too long. "Thank you," she started. "Eli," I said. "I don't usually volunteer my name." It slipped out. She nodded like that mattered. "Eli, right?" She was my friend's mom. I hadn't seen her in years, not since high school, not since I'd grown into the kind of person who no longer needed rides home. Back then, she wore her hair shorter. Now it fell past her shoulders, threaded with gray she didn't bother hiding. She wore a sweater that looked soft enough to keep secrets in. "How's Mark?" she asked, feeding quarters into the machine with careful fingers. "Busy," I said. It was true and not. Mark texted in bursts, long gaps in between. I replied to all of them. He replied to some. She smiled at that. The machines rattled behind us, metal drums turning over clothes that used to fit better. We ended up sitting 2 chairs apart, watching our laundry like it might try to escape. She remembered things. My major. The coffee I used to order when she'd take us after soccer practice. "No sugar," she said, glancing at me, like she was checking if it was still true. "It is," I said. I folded a napkin from the vending machine counter into a square, then a smaller square, then flattened it again. She noticed. Her eyes flicked down, then back up. Not curious, just present. There was a quiet joke about how dryers always eat one sock. She said it like she was letting me in on a secret everyone already knew. I laughed too hard, then apologized for it, then felt stupid for apologizing. I realized, somewhere between loads, that I wasn't checking my phone. The hum of the machines filled the space where I usually keep my thoughts busy. When I did glance down, there was still nothing there. No missed calls. No plans. She stood to gather her clothes. I stood too quickly and knocked my knee into the chair. She steadied me with 2 fingers on my arm, just long enough to count. 1, 2, then gone. At the door, she hesitated. The bell above it didn't ring yet. "You've grown," she said like it surprised her. Then, softer, "too much to be his friend." I didn't know what to do with that, so I nodded. She smiled like she hadn't meant to say it out loud. That night, while my clothes cooled on the chair, my phone buzzed. A new message. Her. "If you're free tomorrow, I make terrible coffee. You can come tell me why." I went the next morning because I told myself it wasn't a big thing. Just coffee. Just being polite to someone who'd once packed orange slices for halftime. Her place smelled like lemon cleaner and something toasted too long. She apologized for the coffee before I'd even tasted it, fussing with the kettle like it might defend her. The kitchen was narrow, sunlight caught in the dust over the sink. There was a magnet crooked on the fridge, holding a dentist reminder from last year. "Sit," she said, nodding to the small table. "Before I give you something worse to drink." E said. Folded my hands. Unfolded them. She noticed, but didn't comment. The coffee was thin, honestly, but hot. We drank it anyway. She wrapped both hands around her mug and leaned back against the counter instead of sitting across from me. It made the space feel less like a meeting and more like a pause. "Mark doesn't come by much," she said, like she was explaining the weather. "He calls. That counts." I nodded. I stared at a small chip in the rim of my mug. "He's always been like that." She smiled, not offended. "Yes, you were the opposite. Always early. Always waiting." I didn't know she'd noticed. The thought landed and stayed. I imagined myself back then, sitting on her porch steps after practice, shoes untied, hoping someone would remember to drive me home. I hadn't told anyone that before. I didn't tell her now. I just said I didn't mind. She looked at me then. Really looked. Her eyes didn't move away when mine did. She told me, after a moment, that the house had been too quiet since the divorce. Not dramatic, just a statement. You don't realize how much noise one person makes, she said. Until it's gone. I imagined her alone in this kitchen at night, kettle clicking off by itself. I imagined staying too long. I pushed the thought away and stirred my coffee, even though there was nothing left to dissolve. There were things we didn't say. That I was in my 20s and still figuring out how to feel steady. That she was in her 40s and already knew how easily steady things tipped. That she was my friend's mom, and some lines, once crossed, never really went back. We washed the mugs together. She handed me a towel. Our hands brushed when we reached for the same plate. Not a spark, just contact. Still, neither of us moved right away. The silence grew loud enough to hear my own breathing. Sorry, she said, though nothing had happened. It's fine, I said. I'm in it in too many directions. At the door, she hesitated again, like she had at the laundromat. Her fingers touched my sleeve, smoothing an imaginary crease. It was the kind of gesture people make when they're done talking, but not done feeling. Thank you for coming, she said. I nodded. I stepped back into the hall. When the door closed, it wasn't loud. I don't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me and chose, just barely, not to look away. The next week rearranged itself around her without asking me. I started timing my errands, so I might run into her, then caught myself doing it and changed routes. I told myself it was nothing, that noticing someone wasn't the same as wanting. Still, when my phone buzzed, my chest did the small, stupid lift before my brain could intervene. We fell into a rhythm that felt accidental. A message about the weather. A question about a charger she thought I'd left years ago. I answered too quickly, then waited longer the next time, like that might even things out. One afternoon, I stopped by to return a book Mark had loaned me and forgotten. The house sounded lived in a way it hadn't before. Music low, a window open. She met me at the door and hesitated, then stepped aside. You can just... Yeah, she said, gesturing vaguely. I took off my shoes without being asked. She was reorganizing a shelf in the living room, moving the same 3 objects back and forth. A photo frame, a candle that had burned down unevenly, a small ceramic bowl full of keys. Did you need help? I asked. She shook her head, then nodded. If you don't mind. We stood close, passing things hand to hand. Sometimes our fingers touched. Sometimes they didn't, and that felt louder. She kept clearing her throat, like she was about to say something and then deciding against it. You don't have to come by so much, she said suddenly, not unkindly. Not looking at me. I froze with the candle in my hand. I can stop. She exhaled, a long breath, like she'd been holding it. I didn't say that. We stood there. The music ended. The next song didn't start. Mark mentioned you, she said, after a moment. Asked if we'd been talking. And I said, too fast. She finally looked at me. Her expression was careful, protective, of what I wasn't sure. I told him we ran into each other. Which is true, I said. Yes. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. It's true. I imagined Mark laughing, oblivious. I imagined explaining nothing. I imagined explaining everything. None of it fit. She went to the kitchen to make tea. I followed, then stopped in the doorway, unsure if I'd been invited. She noticed and handed me a mug without comment. Our shoulders brushed as we leaned against opposite counters. The kettle clicked off. Neither of us moved. This feels, she started, then stopped. She pressed her lips together, then laughed softly, like she was embarrassed by herself. You don't need to hear that. I don't mind, I said. I did mind. I didn't. She set her mug down, untouched. Her hands were steady. That surprised me. I don't know what you want, she said. Not accusing, just tired. I wanted to say something simple. I wanted to say the right thing. I said nothing. She stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the tea on her breath. Close enough that if I leaned in, just slightly, she didn't move away. She didn't move forward either. Her eyes flicked to my mouth and back up, like she was checking herself. We stayed there, suspended. The moment stretched thin, like it might tear. Then her phone buzzed on the counter. She stepped back to check it, breaking the spell without looking at me. Sorry, she said, already turning away. I stood there a second longer than I should have, my body still leaning toward where she'd been, holding onto the space she'd left behind. It happened on a walk neither of us named as one. She texted about the spare key, said she'd found it in the ceramic bowl, the one that held everything important and nothing at the same time. I think this is yours, she wrote. No emoji, no apology. I went over near dusk. The day had cooled unevenly, patches of heat still clinging to the sidewalk. She didn't invite me inside, just handed me the key at the door, her fingers wrapped around it longer than necessary, like she was confirming its weight. Do you want to walk? She asked, already stepping away from the house. We went down the block without talking. Her pace was steady. Mine adjusted to match it. The streetlights flickered on one by one, not quite synchronized. Somewhere a dog barked and then stopped. You didn't have to come so fast, she said. I was nearby, I said. It was almost true. She nodded. She kept her eyes forward. Mark came by yesterday. That landed heavier than it should have. Oh, he asked if you were around. A pause. More than before. And she stopped walking. I stopped too, a half step behind her. She turned then, finally, like she decided not to protect me from her face anymore. I don't like that it bothered me, she said. Her voice was calm. That was the worst part. I don't like that I noticed how often he says your name now, or that I wondered if you'd been here after. I said nothing. My hands were in my pockets, gripping the key hard enough to leave an imprint. We haven't done anything, I said. It sounded like a defense, or a hope. I know, she said. That's what scares me. We sat on a bench a little farther down. The kind people forget is there. She crossed her ankles, uncrossed them, smoothed her skirt even though it wasn't wrinkled. I keep telling myself this is just, she gestured vaguely. Company, conversation, someone who remembers things. I remember things, I said quietly, then wished I hadn't. She looked at me, really looked, and something in her expression shifted. Not surprise. Recognition. Again. You're not a boy, she said. Then, after a beat, softer, and I'm not pretending you are. The air between us tightened. I could feel my own heartbeat, slow and loud. I imagined leaning in. I imagined not stopping. I imagined the aftermath. Mark's face, the house quieter in a different way. I don't want to hurt anyone, she said. I know, I said. She laughed once, under her breath. That's the problem. She reached out, then stopped herself, her hand hovering near my wrist, close enough that I could feel the heat of it. She didn't touch me. That felt deliberate. That felt like effort. If I asked you to stay away, she said, not looking at me now, would you? The question hung there, unanswered, not because I didn't have an answer, but because saying it out loud might have been the first thing we couldn't take back. She stopped answering first, not abruptly, not enough that I could accuse her of anything, even to myself. A reply that came hours later instead of minutes. A sentence shortened. No questions at the end. The kind of distance that looks like adulthood if you don't stare at it too long. I told myself I'd imagine the intensity. That benches and keys and almost don't count for much in the daylight. So I match her pace. I waited. I didn't show up unannounced. I walked past her house without looking up. Days passed. Then a week. When she finally texted, it was about something practical. I'm reorganizing the garage. There's a box of Mark's old things. Some of it might be yours. No punctuation that suggested tone. Just information. I went because not going felt like admitting something. The garage was cooler than the house. Concrete holding onto the night. Boxes stacked unevenly. A single bulb humming overhead. She was already there, sleeves rolled up, hair pulled back in a way I hadn't seen before. Efficient. Guarded. Hi, she said. Hey. She handed me a box without looking at me. Inside were things that didn't belong to either of us anymore. Trophies, notebooks, a sweatshirt I'd forgotten I'd left at Mark's sophomore year. My name, written once in marker, faded. I should have given this to you sooner, she said. It's fine. We stood there, parallel, sorting through the past with careful hands. She moved fast. I slowed down, reading margins, remembering the way time used to stretch. I didn't tell you, she said suddenly, still focused on the box, that my ex is moving back to town. That was new. Oh, not to reconcile, she added, too quickly. He wants to be closer to our daughter. I didn't know there was a daughter. The word shifted everything. It explained the fridge magnets, the dentist reminder, the carefulness. That's good, I said. It sounded wrong. I meant something else. She nodded. It is. It means things need to be clearer. Clearer. The word landed between us and stayed there. After that, she worked with her back to me. I finished the box and taped it shut, even though I wasn't taking it yet. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from Mark about a weekend plan. I didn't open it. I should go, I said, though I wasn't sure where. She didn't argue. She wiped her hands on a rag that was already clean. Thank you for understanding. I wanted to ask what exactly I was understanding. I didn't. At home, I set the box by the door and didn't open it again. I drafted a message, deleted it, drafted another. Something light, something careful, something that wouldn't tip the balance she'd just rebuilt. Nothing felt right. That evening, I passed the bench we'd sat on. Someone else was there, talking on the phone, laughing too loudly. I kept walking. Later, I typed her name into my phone and stared at the empty text field until the screen dimmed. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence. It ended where most things between us had started, at her door. I hadn't planned to go. I stood on my side of the street longer than necessary, telling myself that closure was just another word people used when they didn't want to admit they were lonely. Then I crossed anyway. Habit is persuasive. I knocked once. Soft. Immediately regretted it. She opened the door like she'd been awake for hours. No surprise. No relief, either. Just a measured inhale, like she was bracing against weather. Hi, she said. E. We stood there, the hallway light behind her spilling out onto the porch. Somewhere inside, a clock ticked too loudly. I shouldn't be here, I said. She nodded. I know. That made it easier. Or harder. I stepped inside anyway. The kitchen was unchanged. Same narrow space. Same kettle. Same magnets still crooked. The familiarity stung more than distance had. She leaned against the counter. I stayed by the door, keys still in my hand though I didn't need them. They pressed into my palm, grounding me. I didn't disappear because of you, she said quietly. I disappeared because I didn't trust myself to be careful. I looked at the floor. I didn't trust myself either. Silence settled between us. Not awkward, just full. My daughter asked about you, she added. She saw your name on my phone once. That did it. The room shifted. Not dramatically, just enough to make everything sharper. What did you say? I asked. That you were someone kind, she said, and that I needed to do better by everyone. Including me, she didn't say. Excluding me, she didn't have to. I stepped closer. Not all the way. Just enough to be heard without raising my voice. I don't regret knowing you. She looked at me then, and something in her face softened. Not longing. Acceptance. I do, she said, then corrected herself. I regret how close I let it get. I nodded. That felt fair. The kettle clicked on by itself. She hadn't touched it. Habit again. She poured the water out anyway, steam rising between us and disappearing. I wanted to say I started. Stopped. Started again. I wanted you to know that I would have stayed away if you'd asked. I know, she said. Her voice caught just slightly. That's why I didn't. We stood there, close enough now that the space between us mattered. She reached out, not to my face, not to my chest, but to my wrist. Her fingers wrapped lightly, then tightened once like punctuation. Thank you, she said. Not for coming. For leaving. I turned toward the door. Paused. Looked back. She smiled. Small. Real. The kind you give when you're choosing something difficult on purpose. Okay, she said. Okay, I echoed. When I stepped outside, the door closed gently behind me. Not a final sound, just a right one. Time passed the way it usually does, without asking permission. It wasn't marked by big events, just adjustments. I stopped walking past her house on purpose. Then, months later, started again without realizing I was doing it. She stopped texting late, then started sending messages in the morning, the harmless kind. Did you ever fix that chair? It's supposed to rain. At 8:47 a.m. On a Tuesday, I saw her at the laundromat again. Same place. Same hum. Different season. She was loading a washer, sleeves rolled up, hair pinned back with the same absent-minded care. She looked up and smiled like she hadn't rehearsed it. "Hi, Eli," she said. That was it. No history lesson. No apology. Just recognition. We sat 2 chairs apart this time. Respectful distance. She folded a towel slowly, aligning the corners. I watched the machine spin. My phone stayed in my pocket. "Tea?" she asked eventually. Not an invitation. A suggestion. "Okay," I said. After that, things grew the way plants do when no one keeps checking them. Carefully. Unevenly. We met for walks that were actually walks. We talked about work. About her daughter, now older, more observant. About Mark, who had moved cities again and called less. About nothing, sometimes, which felt like progress. There were rules, unspoken but firm. Daylight first. Public places. Time. We honored them until they softened on their own. The first time I sat at her kitchen table again, the coffee was still terrible. She watched me take a sip, waiting for the familiar apology. "It's fine," I said. "I've had worse." She smiled, shaking her head. Liar. We didn't touch much at first. When we did, it was deliberate. A hand over mine while the kettle heated. Her shoulder against my arm on the bench, the forgotten one down the block. No ruse. No pretending this was simple. Life didn't suddenly behave. Her ex still existed. Her daughter still asked questions. I still had days where I felt too young, and days she felt too tired. But there was warmth now, something steady under the doubt. One evening, months later, she handed me a mug and said, "You can leave your shoes on." It felt like trust. We never talked about when it officially became us. It just did. Somewhere between shared groceries and knowing which silence meant what. Somewhere between black coffee for me, tea for her, set on the counter without asking. Sometimes we still walk past the laundromat. Sometimes we sit on the bench. Not to remember, just because it's there. On quiet mornings, when the house hasn't decided what kind of day it will be yet, she'll look at me over the rim of her mug and smile. Not the careful one, the real one.